Welcome to Capital Alchemy. I'm Tatenda and I'm here with my esteemed co-host, Nthabiseng. Today we'll be discussing and unpacking the 2024 Africa Wealth Report compiled and published by Henley and Partners in conjunction with wealth intelligence firm New World Wealth. The report provides a comprehensive review of the wealthiest countries and cities in Africa, along with expert insights on economic mobility, the investment migration sector, and wealth management on the continent. Africa is home to, in US dollar terms, 21 billionaires, 342 centimillionaires, 135,200 millionaires, with a combined liquid investable wealth of 2.5 trillion. Interestingly, the continent's millionaire population is set to rise by 65% over the next 10 years. To assist us in analyzing this yearly report, we have the presence of Italian coffee enthusiast Adrian Faccio, client manager, and Mdhlozini, private client advisor, both representing Henley and Partners. Welcome, guys.
Morning. Thanks for having us.
Good, perfect. So the best start to this discussion would be to get an overview of Henley and Partners, their establishment, and their mission on the global and African context. Please go ahead and jump into this one.
Well, Henley and Partners as a firm has been around for many years, for more than 25 years, I believe. Initially, it started out in the early 2000s as a government advisory firm.
Okay.
It assisted the government of St. Kitts and Nevis to set up the first citizenship by investment program in the Caribbean. And off the success of that program, the firm helped other countries set up programs in turn. And then in time, the firm pivoted to a client-facing role, where Nthabiseng and myself now sit, advising wealthy, high-net-worth individuals around the world on residency and citizenship by investment programs.
Okay. Fantastic. And
can we just discuss a tad further about your roles in Henley and Partners and what you guys are also trying to achieve within your specs?
Well, firstly, I want to ensure that the coffee doesn't boil over. So with your permission, I just want to see how it's getting on, but it seems to be coming along quite right. And Nthabiseng, do you want to maybe answer?
So our role essentially is to advise clients. Firstly, at the core of it, we're a professional advisory firm. So we advise clients in acquiring, residency or citizenships that are available, and we have over 50 programs that we can advise clients on in various jurisdictions around the world. So our job is to sit with clients, their families, take them through, understand their objectives, because, no two clients are the same. And of course, also the jurisdictions are very different in terms of, what they can afford clients. So it's very important to have a good understanding of what the objectives is or what the objectives are, what are the drivers, what are their needs, and then find a program that aligns to their objectives.
Yeah, please elaborate on that, because there's something else I want to trigger with her.
Yeah, I just hope the coffee isn't making too much of a noise, but alongside advising clients, we're also the advisors of many banking institutions in South Africa, wealth providers. They're at the coalface of having these discussions with clients, whether they do investment migration programs, whether they make investments overseas to obtain residency or citizenship. And often those private client advisors aren't necessarily aware of the workings of the industry, what are good investments, what aren't good investments, what are good programs, what are bad programs. And so we have relationships with many of these institutions, and we called in to advise really what is ultimately the best objective for their clients.
So in essence, what you're trying to say is that your relationships with them and the banks, you'd probably be with a private banker or your wealthy side of the bank, and then work in conjunction with them, because obviously they know how much they're holding and what they're trying to achieve within their specs.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, so it's a myriad of professionals that we also work with. So yes, of course, the bankers are great fertile ground for us to work with, but also tax advisors, lawyers. We have good relationships with these professionals as well, because they also advise clients and wealthy individuals on their tax implications and so forth.
So initially when we met, the discussion was about synergies of Henley and Partners and CIG. And somewhere in that conversation, it went on a tangent of finding out about education.
Yeah.
And how you guys also place kids with the right education school, with the right schools, but obviously you put them in an education program because, to my understanding, you also test them every 6 months if the client wants them to be tested every 6 months. Other than that, it's every 3 years because of age, to ensure that they are in line with the schools that they're going to go to. Can you just discuss that a tad further?
Sure. So you touch on a very key aspect of one of the drivers that drive people to look into these programs, and that's, of course, access and opportunities of accessing institutions, educational institutions abroad. So, it sort of lent itself to Henley also starting to look into that as a potential service, and as a result of, clients, wanting to find out in that particular jurisdiction that I have interest in, what schools are available, what universities are available. And so we then opened up an education service that we offer, where we're able to assess. It's not a test, but we assess fundamentally where the client or the child is in terms of their education abilities and where they stand, and that's benchmarked against the UK standard.
The UK national average.
That's right. So looking at, where are the developmental areas, where do they stand? Do they meet the requirements for, say, a UK, if the child is interested in the UK or the US? Because at the heart of it, all these jurisdictions are very different in terms of requirements. So we're so used to the system here in South Africa that it's simply your academics, and that then, where do you stand from an average, and whether you meet the requirements and the points system. But in other jurisdictions, there are other things that you need to take into consideration, such as, your cultural aspects. Are you involved in culture activities? Are you maybe looking at sporting, etc.? And if it is sports, what types of sports? So it's a whole holistic view that goes into an application and ensuring that the child is ready to access those educational opportunities abroad.
Henley and Partners initiatives within the continent entails economic development. Do you have practical examples that you can share us of some of the initiatives that Henley and Partners have done to, help the continent on a social and economic perspective?
Yes, so there's two interesting things that Henley and Partners do. The first is private clients who participate in the programs that we offer are effectively become global citizens by the virtue of acquiring another citizenship or another residency. And that really assists those individuals in traveling internationally, which is seen as a asset with regards to their work and being able to be successful businessmen around the world. That's the first thing. The second thing that we do is we have a government advisory side of our business.
Yeah.
And the government advisory side of the business objective is to advise governments how to set up these programs in a country with the express purpose of how to attract debt-free foreign direct investment. And that benefit of these programs is really why governments find them quite interesting. And in the case of Africa, there's two examples that we can cite. No, I beg your pardon, three. There's Mauritius. They have a residency program that's been long running and a very successful way of bringing people to Mauritius, investing in property, transferring businesses,
setting up structures,
etc., etc. And that's really helped spur the whole idea of Mauritius as an offshore financial center. And a key driver of that was their residency program, and still is their residency program. Looking at the success of Mauritius, two other African countries have, or in the starting phases of trying to emulate that process. The first is Egypt. They have a residency program that we've recently started to market. Not popular from a South African office perspective, because not many of our South African clients really look to Egypt as a destination to divest to. But from our clients in the Middle East, our Dubai office, our Singapore office, you can appreciate the synergies between the geographical areas and why there'd be appeal there. The second country, which we are currently working with, is Namibia.
Okay.
They have a residency program that we structure and advise them on, and we currently market. It's still in the very early stages of the process. And it was quite exciting from a Henley perspective that the government of Namibia actually acknowledged the fact that such a program could bring a lot of FDI into the country if successfully run and managed. Look, admittedly, like I said, it is early stages. The proof of the pudding would be the running of this program over a number of years to see the traction that it gives. And probably it might be modified in some way or other depending on the market response. But the fact that they're willing to have the discussion and engage with us and let us run it is very encouraging.
Amazing.
So the wheel spanner that I'm going to throw in all of this is, may there be a delay on that Namibian program, not that it is on the watch list for FATF?
The Financial Action Task Force. The honest answer is, Loretta, I don't know.
Okay. Because it's February this year, Kenya went on in Namibia.
Well, look, I mean, being on the grey list, as it is called, doesn't necessarily mean that everything grinds to a halt. We just have to look at South Africa's example over the, how many months? Forgive me.
It's a year.
It's been a year. It's
Even
been a year
Mauritius
now.
also
Yes, it's not nice to be on it, and yes, it may certainly be annoying from a compliance point of view, but the wheels haven't fallen off.
That's why I call it a watch list instead of saying the grey list.
And in all fairness, it's probably for the better,
Yeah.
because what it really is an opportunity for a country to implement best practice, to address certain areas that may not have been a priority to address because governments may have been more focused on other developmental needs of the country, and only good things can come from it, because if those action points are addressed in time and implemented judiciously, it would certainly strengthen the financial institutions of the country in question.
Yeah, we only just need to look at Mauritius and what they were able to do, once they were flagged and were grey listed. So we hope that, we follow that sort of playbook for the rest of the continent.
On the other hand, it's not following just the playbook. I'd also like for us to follow the taxation laws there.
Of course.
Well, I'm going to follow the coffee playbook. Before the coffee gets cold, I'm going to serve out some mocha. Loretta, seeing that you're our co-host, the red cup goes to you.
Thank you.
Seeing that you're a fan of the Giro.
Listen, that coffee as it was brewing
I
now.
don't pink cup, but maybe King of the Mountains might
King of the Mountains,
might be a fair compliment.
As it was brewing, and I was like, can you talk faster? That smell.
Oh, man.
An orange to match your blouse.
Yes,
Thank you, Adrian.
Great. So whilst Adrian serves the coffee, let's circle back to the report itself. I mean, Nthabiseng, can you just elaborate on what's the significance of the report, and is it generally for showcasing or telling the world what's happening in Africa in terms of wealth trends?
Yeah, I think at the heart of it is just tracking where the wealth lies within South Africa. I mean, you did a great intro outlining just how much wealth exists within the African continent. Adrian mentioned, one of the countries that are also looking to, or that in Africa that have the citizen by investment, and of course what that does to a country in terms of direct foreign investment, and that's Egypt. And Egypt has been poised second place within the top African wealth contributors. So we've got South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and Morocco, and of course collectively those countries contributed 56% of Africa's high net worth individuals, and over 90% of its billionaires. And of course, South Africa leading the pack, but Egypt right at the tail of it in second place. So, what that does for the African continent is to say to the world, hey, Africa is open for business and Africa is ready to do business. And essentially we're looking for that FDI in the various countries. But one of the contributors also cautioned against not looking at Africa as one homogenous sort of state. Yeah. So it's important to understand the different nuances of the various countries that make up the 54 countries within Africa, and what makes it tick, what makes it an attractive destination in order to invest. So, yeah.
Interesting enough, Adrian, what Nthabiseng just covered and the report itself. South Africa being one of the number one contributors within Africa's Wealth Report. The funny thing is that South Africa is actually only 0.4% contributor globally. But we are now still saying, hey, look at Africa, foreign direct investment. Should we also now say, yes, we are here, open to trade and for you guys to invest in us, but can we now also negate your structural adjustment programs because those create dependency? Should we not also be reviewing other ways of how to invest into Africa?
It certainly creates an opportunity because the Africa Wealth Report as an exercise in its basest form is a benchmarking exercise. A lot of work is done on other jurisdictions around the world with regards to the economic indicators, but to put everything Africa-related together in one report, in the Africa Wealth Report, benchmark a number of metrics, and then publish it out over the Henley and Partners network, really is a valuable exercise in and of itself for policymakers, for decision makers, for those who are interested in Africa, or even those in Africa, to have a point of reference with regards to how they view the continent, and identifying opportunities that the continent presents. Yes, it isn't the largest economic bloc if you take the continent as a whole internationally, but it's certainly a very valuable one. It's blessed with immense natural resources.
Absolutely.
It's also blessed with, let us not forget, in the coming years, probably the single most valuable resource internationally. That is a youthful population. Where demographics around the world are starting to take a negative trend. In Europe, famously, Japan, some areas in Asia. China, I believe, is no longer growing and has recently been surpassed by India. One of the biggest drivers of growth and economic potential is a growing and youthful population. And that in and of itself is something to bear in mind in the African context.
Perfect. Adrian, I liked how you labeled the report as a benchmark. In terms of comparison, in terms of comparing it to other reports that you guys publish, I mean, across other continents, how do you gauge the African report?
Very positively.
Okay.
We recently published the USA, the inaugural USA Wealth Report a few months ago, and given that it was the inaugural report of its kind, and it was coming up against the likes of the reports that were published by Spears and Fortune magazine and the like. That report wasn't met with the same degree of enthusiasm that the Africa Wealth Report was.
Okay.
And it's certainly become a bit of a niche for us because we've done it now 3 times, if I recall correctly, and it's eagerly awaited by all market commentators.
Wow, amazing! Good job.
I'm very big on investment diversification. I'm very big on succession planning and wealth planning. So when I saw this report, my fingers tingled. And I'm sure I contacted Nthabiseng and I was like, unfortunately, I can't be on that webinar, but I need to get you guys in here. Your investment migration, your residency programs, to me, I see them as just another investment diversification option.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yes. That's what they are.
Can we just divulge in opportunities of how people can literally still stay in South Africa, but still have access, or as we say, passports into various jurisdictions?
Yeah. So maybe let me draw an analogy with something you and your listeners are intimately familiar with in the financial services industry. You're notoriously famous for not keeping your eggs in one basket. You divest across asset classes, you divest across currencies, geographical jurisdictions. Wealth is offshored. Parts of portfolio are direct holding in shares. Other parts of the portfolio may be in bonds and others in cash.
Income funds and
income
markets.
Funds, as the opportunities present themselves,
Yeah.
and depending on the nature of the client. Wealth managers around the world are famous for executing such excellent strategies. They don't always work, but most of the time they do in preserving and growing clients' wealth. The question Henley challenges people with is, that's all and well doing that with your wealth, but what about your life and your global mobility? What about diversifying your ability to not be dependent on one particular region and the whims of a particular government having good diplomatic relations with their neighbors, with the rest of the world? Because we aren't a migration agency. We don't encourage immigration. What we encourage is global mobility, and the ability of people to move around freely, being unimpeded by an accident or birth for all intents and purposes.
Thank you for saying that. I think that is the perfect statement of saying what you guys are trying to do is global mobility without being impeded to one jurisdiction or staying in one place, but having access to various jurisdictions.
It's extremely powerful, and probably, if you look at the majority of our clients, you ask them why are they doing these programs, why are they investing in a Portuguese investor visa, an Italian investor visa, a Caribbean citizenship by investment program. 9 out of 10 of them say they're doing it for their children. They want them to be able to, if they want to attend a business meeting in Paris, don't have to worry about waiting for a Schengen visa, jump on a plane, off they go. If they want to visit China for whatever reason, jump on a plane and go. And that's the great utility with these programs. In fact, if you go into our website, we have some fantastic tools there, and one of them is a passport strength index. Where you click on the necessary menu and put the drop down menu, the passport, where you're from, say South Africa, and it will show you on a map, on a list, all the countries you can access visa free, and what will be glaringly obvious are the countries you can't access visa free. For example, the Schengen zone. But then you can add on to that other countries that offer residency or citizenship by investment programs, and you can almost create a portfolio of 1, 2, or 3 other residencies and citizenships, and you can see the impact of what that gives you. It's a really cool tool, if I may use the adjective.
And fun fact, right now, South Africans on their green mamba, their passport, can access 108 countries. Now, when we hear 108 countries, it does sound like quite a substantial amount of countries that you can access. But the question is, which countries?
Good point, Nthabiseng. I actually wanted to introduce another topic where we want to discuss about the passport issue. I mean, probably about a week or two ago, at the Africa CEO Forum, we had Aliko Dangote speaking about.
Even so, that article yesterday, that even within Africa, there's 60 countries that he can't access without getting a visa.
Exactly. Ease of doing business.
Ease of doing business.
Us Africans looking ourselves as international citizens. It's a good factor. And on your report, I noticed Seychelles and Mauritius being the top 2 strongest passports in Africa. What's the reason? Why can't continental Africa follow suit to some of the islands that are on the coast of Africa?
It's a subjective question, because what ultimately determines how strong a country's passport is, it's a reflection of the government of that country's ability to have good diplomatic relations with other countries around the world. And conversely, they have to make the effort to invest time and money in ensuring those relationships are positive. Now, the 2 island states, Seychelles and Mauritius, they've got one thing in common, apart from both being islands, is that given that the economies are so small, they, other than their marine resources, they're not resource-rich countries. Ostensibly, what they realize is that they'll be very dependent on trade, the flow of people in and out of their countries, and they can't afford to fight anyone. Let's call a spade a spade. They can't afford to annoy much larger geopolitical players.
Yeah.
And so historically, it's always been a foreign policy prerogative of those countries to ensure that they maintain good relations with many of the powerful regional blocs in the area and abroad, and hence that reflects in their passport strength.
Yeah.
To draw another analogy beyond Africa, you need to look at the relevant strength of the Italian passport, which is actually the strongest passport. Yes, I know.
They had to make an appearance.
but who doesn't like the Italians? No, jokes aside. No, really, because the government of Italy has always sought a very open foreign policy. They haven't been expansionist in terms of a military agenda. The economy of Italy is also resource poor. Yes, the manufacturing sector and financial sectors are extremely strong, but mostly the manufacturing sector, and that's dependent on trade, the bringing in of natural resources, having good trade links with China, excellent trade links with America, within continental Europe and Africa as well. And that's why in the case of Italy, you can access, I think it's more than 95 countries visa-free. And you compare that to a country further down the list, such as the UK, which has been steadily losing position over time, as they have become increasingly isolationist in their views. You can argue both sides of the coin, whether they're right to pursue a policy of Brexit and isolationism. The internal politics dictated that, but that certainly reflects on their passport strength and the ability that their subjects had to enjoy travel around the world. Poorer for it, definitely, unfortunately.
Okay, good. Director, when we went through the report, and also when we're trying to build up the conversation for the report, I mean, we talked about what were the key contributors and data considerations in building the report. You know, it's something that our listeners and ourselves are quite inquisitive to know about.
I think for me, with that report, and the thing that I always say bubbled me most was how you guys actually gave focus to Africa, how you gave focus to the high net worth of Africa, and with the understanding that within the next 10 years, that's going to move, and there's going to be more high net worth individuals contributing towards that report. Can we just unpack the contributors to all of that? Because, and we don't need the analytics, we just need to understand the dynamics of why. You guys we've had discussions about expanding together into Africa. And not only for the high net worth, obviously it is, but also for our companies to understand the environments and why.
Exactly. And I think building on to what Lerert has just said, the difficulty of collating data in Africa. I mean, it's a massive challenge. And you're looking at 54 countries. I mean, getting accurate and correct information. I'd say, how did that go about? And from what Lerert said, we're not going into detail, but just a basic overview.
I can't speak to that directly because I wasn't responsible for crunching those numbers.
And all credit to New World Wealth,
which is their full-time job to ensure the accuracy and dependency of those facts and figures. Actually, on Friday afternoon, we Nthabiseng and myself had a meeting with New World Wealth, and they took us through a little bit of their thinking, and I'm led to believe it's all publicly available information that they use, and it can all be corroborated back to publicly available sources. Though when you look at the report and you see those billionaires, centimillionaires, in each case they can name the individual. Not that they publish it, but they know.
Yes, they know where they are.
Exist, and so is in that country, in that city, and they are public figures, so there's nothing untoward about that. But one interesting point that was raised in that discussion with regards to the value of this Africa network and the Africa wealth is the Africa diaspora that exists, not just within Africa. For example, in South Africa, we've had a steady flow of Africans from north of our border heading south to South Africa, being the economic engine of the continent for all intents and purposes, but also diaspora in Europe, the UK, Dubai, and Singapore to a lesser extent. That diaspora is a highly entrepreneurial element of African society in general. They're generally very successful businessmen.
Okay.
And they are really the pioneers of the Africa network extending beyond Africa into the trade routes and the wealth networks of the world in general. I mean, Dubai as a financial services hub is well established and well known. And they're effectively the pioneers of an Africa that is now starting to assert itself on the world and view beyond its own borders. The possibility that there is opportunity beyond here. And they would really be, I mean, if you, as an analogy, I don't want to draw too much of a historical comparison, but in a way, in the 17th and 18th century, were the English no different with the East India Company?
Yeah.
Setting out from Europe to fertile markets beyond their own shores. Maybe we're starting to see the start of that as well from an African perspective. And that will be critical, I guess, for groups such as yourself to align themselves with such individuals and work alongside them and the opportunities that they present.
Yeah.
Because they'll be very critical drivers of growth in the continent going forward.
Going beyond borders.
I think on a personal note, one of my, I'll call him a mentor from a distance, hailing other than in South Africa, the great Elon Musk. I mean, it's a good example of knowledge and skill transfer from Africa to the world. And whilst he's in the US, he's been able to conquer the world. I think we've seen Africans being the third demographic in the USA that has been quite successful. You look at the Indian community and the Chinese community. The African community has played quite a pivotal role in the USA in terms of academia, entrepreneurship, etc. Have you seen any transfer of that knowledge, that wealth, and that information back to the continent, if I may ask? I mean, in terms with the clientele that you deal with. I don't know if it's a difficult or question that you can answer there.
So I think there may very well be. Of course, right now we don't have I certainly don't have the answer to that. Yeah. But knowing what lies within our organization, where we know that a lot of our clients don't leave. Yeah. So, they just want that insurance in their back pocket. And so when we're tracking these high net worths and ultra high net worths and centimillionaires, etc., that sit within the African continent, it's because they're still, hoping to continue to build wealth within the continent, and hopefully we will see more and more of that coming through, going to enhance your education, because I do think from a domestic perspective we're not bad, we're not doing too badly, we're not going to sort of talk down on our education system. Yeah. Are there some challenges? Absolutely. But a lot of people have come through our education system and have successfully run and started companies and entities that have become quite prolific around the world. Yeah. But, there is something to be said about the global opportunities that an international education would offer one. And we hope that knowledge and skill transfer, whilst it may be acquired, the knowledge will be acquired abroad, but certainly being, planted back into the country and into the various countries around Africa, and ensuring that the economies still continue to run, and successfully so.
So, guys, just going to go into the report itself and perhaps pull apart a few key points that we found very interesting. I mean, the current top 5 of the world, there's countries in South Africa. In Africa. South Africa tops the list, but interestingly, Morocco seemed to be one of the countries that's been going up. I mean, what's the rationale? What's Morocco doing right, if I'm asking?
Never been to Morocco. I'd love to visit it, but from what I've seen, they have an advantage of really being an extension of the Francophone world.
Yeah.
Very close to France, just south of Spain, southern end of the Mediterranean, and being very close to Europe, having a highly educated population, and relatively lower cost of labor compared to continental Europe, and a business-friendly government has contributed to that very much. So if you just have to look at its popularity as a conference venue, most international firms love stopping over at Marrakesh, resort in the desert, and having management conferences there is, I think, indicative of the appeal the country has to many organizations. But let's not forget the interesting point about Morocco being part of the Francophone world, because speaking a common language, apart from English, which is internationally spoken, but French is really the next most important language.
Yeah.
I'm going to regret what I say. Alongside Mandarin, and but you get the idea of what I'm trying to say, in the sense that they
French, Mandarin, English, yes.
Those three, they're really very, very strategic in that regard. And as a gateway into Europe, as a country geographically, it certainly holds appeal.
I think, I'm going to sit on the other side, even though I am co-hosting. But I think for me, geographically where it's situated, it's strategic for it not to grow. But also the economic investment that has gone into its growth. Like Adrian was talking about how it is the ideal place for a lot of conferences. But when you have an overlook at the country as a whole, there's been a lot of development.
Exactly, yeah.
And that will make it a competitor. Yes, South Africa is developed. And I remember a couple of years ago, Ole saying if we had to take South Africa off the African continent and placed it elsewhere, it would be a good competitor. In hindsight, now we're dealing with grey listing, but I still feel like without regulation and everything else, if everything had to be put in line and in place, we'd still be a good competitor. And on that list, I'm still saying South Africa, Egypt, Nigeria, and Morocco. If you had to take the four and put them on a different continent, they would be global competitors.
If they don't end up fighting each other.
You don't have to put them all on the same continent.
No. I think that's very interesting. But what's also important about Morocco, and also I guess South Africa too, is that Morocco firstly sits in an international geopolitical choke point just south of the Straits of Gibraltar. And so they benefit being on a major international trade route. And then conversely, South Africa as well. Let's not forget the naval importance of the Cape of Good Hope.
Yes.
Should tensions flare up in the Middle East, which let's admit they do from time to time, unfortunately. Where does the majority of the world shipping have to pass? It's just south of our shores. And so what certainly plays into South Africa's favour in the long term is that most or all of the large geopolitical actors acknowledge the strategic importance of our position in the world. And this is, I guess, one of South Africa's great advantages, because we're courted by both sides of the political fence, both buyers and sellers on the international markets. China, America, Europe, acknowledge that they can't afford to have a hostile South Africa strategically positioned right along one of their most important trade routes. And that's an immense asset in South Africa's favour that no other country in Africa is able to replicate, because it is an accident of where it's located. Nigeria has great advantages with regards to its population, with regards to its natural resources, with regards to its central position in the heart of Africa, in terms of being a strategic hold-in that affects the stability of the centre, the heart of Africa. but it's not it's not relevant from a point of view of controlling trade routes.
Yeah.
And that's the one asset that will certainly be in South Africa's favour in the medium to long term, and ensure that many international players, it's in their best interests to ensure South Africa's stability, because ultimately it's in their own economic best interests. You wouldn't want South Africa to go down the road of, God forbid, what the Houthis are doing in the Red Sea. That would be economically disastrous for the world.
Yeah.
South Africa will never end up like that. Obviously, it's a very dramatic example. But it's worth bearing in mind that there is a greater picture at play in our favour.
Yeah.
Perfect. Also, he's still saying with South Africa, Joburg still tops on the cities list with the highest individuals that are millionaires. I mean, interestingly, Cape Town is second, but in the next couple of years, looks like Cape Town is going to topple Johannesburg. Any reasons to that? Is it semi-migration that's causing that, or what? Cape Silicon?
I don't believe it's immigration that's the sole driver of that. And Nthabiseng can back me up on this. I think it's the international appeal of the city as well.
Yeah.
That's probably a major driver in house prices, certain areas of the Cape at least.
Yeah.
We're all familiar with how certain streets in Cape Town only speak German. and who can blame them? It's some of the most beautiful real estate in the country. And when you have individuals in Europe looking at South Africa, effectively being in the same time zone, one flight away. When it's winter there, it's summer here. What better place to have an escape than the Cape? And the cost of living is a lot less. In Europe, the cost of property is a lot less. And that is a big driver of house prices in the Cape. Look, immigration also does play its part. However, the one disadvantage of the Cape is it doesn't have the industry that's still present in the Gauteng area, and that importance of the Johannesburg, the greater Gauteng hub, economically in South Africa will still ensure that the likes of Johannesburg and Pretoria remain very wealthy and very, very relevant in the South African context.
Okay, perfect. Mauritius remains quite a competitive jurisdiction. Out of interest, what are the insights that you guys have seen in the last maybe 2 or 3 years? And we've just also spoken about grey listing. I think they took a very, very strong initiative on getting Mauritius back on track. I mean, is it something that South Africa can learn on, or maybe the African continent itself? Can they take a few things from Mauritius and see how best they can make their economies and countries competitive?
Well, I think the most encouraging thing is that everyone can take a lesson from Mauritius to say that it can be done. So that's the encouraging thing. Once you're on the grey list, you do what needs to be done, and you can get off it. Okay. That's very encouraging for us as a country. I think Mauritius had one distinct advantage, is that it's a much smaller economy. It's a much smaller country. It's easier to get things done quickly. Fewer people have to be aligned, and fewer processes have to be managed. It's not to say it's impossible. I mean, I believe South Africa's halfway to meeting all the requirements on the list. Last I read, and I have every reason to believe that in due course we will meet all those requirements and we will get off the list.
So the beautiful thing is that Mauritius, it took them 18 months to get off that list, and with South Africa as well, we're also anticipating roughly 18 to 20 months. We're already halfway off the list. But going back to what you said, is there anything that we could be learning? I still believe that as a continent, if we came together, we could be learning from each other a lot. There's a lot of skills, there's a lot of knowledge share that could occur within the continent that could elevate us.
So for me, just to add to that, and you're spot on, what we would definitely need, and I think that's also been outlined within the report itself, is having stable governance. I think once we fix our governance aspects within the various countries, and I mean, we just need to, so many can be sort of highlighted where governance has been critical issue in the in the fallen economies in the various countries. So once we can fix that, I think there's a huge opportunity that presents itself that for us to be able to leverage on our expertise, lean on each other, and really become a powerhouse of a continent.
Great. Lerato, before Nthabiseng and Adrian jump in on this one, with your vast experience within the private wealth space, what are the key drivers that you've seen that have helped people build wealth? I mean, in South Africa and in other parts of the continent. I mean, is it specifically the abundance of natural resources, entrepreneurial ecosystems?
I'm loving how you're bringing in every aspect of who I am.
Policies, etc. Yeah. Just want to hear your bits.
Yeah, so you're literally bringing in every aspect of who I am. So obviously I study political science. So I always keep, like Gareth was saying earlier in the office today, that now it's politics season, and every time I see a poster, I think of Lerato. And then when we talk about wealth and everything else, I'm the one that's keeping everyone up to date on where things are. So, yes, wealth management, private clients, high net worth individuals. To me, it's always been about not only entrepreneurship, but also knowledge and skill set. If we look at a high net worth individuals, or if you look at a very successful African entrepreneurs, they were not too shy about education. And I think this is the one thing that triggered as well when we had conversations with Henley and Partners. They're not too shy about evolving and growing. But they also understand that alongside entrepreneurship is also investment diversification. They also understand that, as Adrian had said earlier, don't put all your eggs in one basket. But even if you don't put them in not more than one basket, also don't diversify them wholly. Because when you're too diversified as well, you can't keep track. And the liquidity of everything else, yes, we diversify our portfolios and our investments and even our education. You never really stay in one career for too long unless if you are like a government official, and going elsewhere is like very difficult to do. So people are always evolving education-wise, even with money and finance. I keep saying this, I think, at our previous podcast with Kim, kept saying, when you get to a certain age, you start realigning and start thinking of things in a different way. Even with your investments, you'll let your investments run, and then once they hit a certain mark, or once you see them depreciate, you want to realign them. And that's the one thing I've noticed, not just in South Africa, but also in Africa as a whole. Having been to Zambia and going to like Kenya and talking to all the other people in other countries, we all have one constant, is that we are all wanting to grow. We all have this, as much as we are all educated and we all have professions, there's also an entrepreneurial side of who we are as Africans. Let's talk diversification. With you guys and Henley and Partners and the aspects that you guys offer.
Yeah, so it's interesting. So diversification has been really key and really a prominent area of discussion amongst high net worths. Our single most, our biggest market right now, and people will be surprised, is actually the US. We've actually opened up several offices in the US, and people are looking to diversify their portfolios. So the US has a very strong passport, as you know, but due to geopolitical tensions, and all sorts of things, and COVID being one of the catalysts where, high net worths didn't want to be sort of stuck in one jurisdiction and thinking that, with me having so much wealth, surely I should be able to just get on a plane, hop into Europe, and I should be okay. But unfortunately, one couldn't do that in during the COVID times. And so a lot of clients have wanted to use and utilize these investment migration programs as a catalyst for that, in order to diversify your portfolios, in order to access different markets, the likes of Portugal, as an example. One of our biggest and most popular programs, and that's globally, not just from a South African Inc. perspective, because it offers that optionality where it starts off as a residence and has a route to citizenship. So that continues to be popular, although there have been slight changes to the program itself. But I think it's been relatively positive enhancements, the little changes that are coming, that won't necessarily be a deterrent. And I think, it will firmly still potentially hold its spot as one of the most popular programs. If we look at the Caribbean, you can stay in country, don't have to move a muscle really, and we can process a citizenship by investment program for Antigua, Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Kitts. So we work with 5, and you can access the Schengen through that, through one of those passports, as well as the UK. So that's also been one of the most popular programs within the from a South African perspective, but also even for people in the US and Europe. So it's been about how, and Adrian mentioned it a little bit earlier, on how you can sit and see which markets you want to access. How much more can I, from a business perspective, from an entrepreneurial perspective, from a studying perspective, depending on what your drivers are. But you can essentially access a lot of the world now through these programs.
And I think the one reality we're starting to see, we've been in the business for 20 years, is that the access to these programs and the need for global mobility is becoming less of a luxury and more of a necessity
Absolutely.
in today's uncertain world. And from your perspective, you may well see more and more of your clients express an interest in these programs and what they have to offer. But they may not necessarily be viewed from a negative perspective in terms of diluting your balance sheet, because a lot of the assets that can be invested in can be argued or be judiciously managed as more of a portfolio diversification question. And the one advantage that Henley and Partners has over many other practitioners in the market is not only we're the original creators of the market, but we're not tied to any one program.
Okay.
As a firm, our objective, first and foremost, is to ensure that a client's core objectives are met, first and foremost. And admittedly, in some cases, in the odd circumstance, meeting the objectives does not necessarily mean doing an investment migration program. There are other solutions that could meet their needs. But we're able to, first and foremost, advise the client and their financial advisor what is the best route for them. Ultimately, the ball's in their court. I often joke with my clients, doing one of the investment migration programs is a bit like a marriage. I can't force someone to like their better half.
Yeah,
that's a very personal choice that they've made and agreed upon, and obviously they've come together as a couple. But the investment migration program concept is an extremely rational element to it, up to a point. But ultimately, the individual themselves has to like the country that they're aligning themselves with, residency or citizenship perspective, because it is a long-term commitment at the end of the day.
Adrian, an interesting point that you raised, it's about how investment migration is not a new phenomenon. I mean, you mentioned that it's the old which has become new again. And the Greeks and the Romans being the first ones.
My favorite story.
He loves it.
To introduce this concept, and how probably the French have also bought into it. I mean, have you seen governments literally lapping onto it? I mean,
very much so. If you look at the whole philosophy behind the Portuguese Golden Visa program, that came about in the 2008, 2009, in the aftermath of the financial crisis. And the Portuguese government was really looking at the real estate market that was devastated by that crisis. And the Portuguese Golden Visa program, in its initial conception, was designed to hopefully, at the time, but it did pick up the property market. And hence property became the key investment driver
Yeah.
of the Portuguese golden visa initially. To take the historical perspective, you mentioned the Greeks and the Romans. For your listeners, I'll indulge in the briefest of stories, but cast your mind back 2,000 years ago to the Roman Empire.
Yeah.
It was the largest military empire in the world at the time.
Yeah.
And there were many wealthy individuals who were outside the borders of the empire
Yep.
who recognized that the political and military and economic security of Rome was something very desirable. And so Rome implemented a scheme where wealthy merchants, wealthy individuals, could buy allegiance to Rome, make a large monetary donation in gold or silver to the Roman Empire, and in exchange for that receive Roman citizenship.
Yeah.
And all the legal rights that gave for protection, for trade, for free travel around the Mediterranean. Not to bring religion into it, but there's a reference in the Bible of St. Paul, the apostle, being a Roman citizen. He actually states he bought his citizenship for a large amount of gold.
Wow.
So in hindsight, this actually goes way back.
It goes way back. It goes way back. The French took it one step further, where they said, "Look, we don't need, we don't want people's money, but we want people to fight for France."
Yeah.
And so they set up the French Foreign Legion, where in exchange for your life and commitment to the cause of France, after serving in the French Foreign Legion for X number of years, you get a new name and you get French citizenship, which for many young men in the world is a highly desirable objective.
Yeah.
The only catch being you had to learn French within a few weeks. but the economic rationale was there, and many entered into the transaction.
Yeah.
And so that idea has been taken forward since time immemorial. How it all started in Henley's case was our chairman, Dr. Christian Kalen, when he was a law student, so he just qualified in Switzerland many decades ago. He wrote his thesis, which you can actually find online, Ius Doni, where he spells out the concept, the historical precincts first of citizenship by investment, and how it can be used in the modern sense by governments as a means of attracting debt-free foreign direct investment. And it's not just about the monetary transaction that's valuable for the country, because yes, there's obviously the immediate benefit of that investment. But imagine beyond that, where you have individuals who are wealthy, who are entrepreneurial, who then align themselves with your country, like it, come and live there, pay taxes, spend money, employ people. The economic benefits and spin-offs are countless and exponential.
Yeah.
So the nice thing that he touched on, taxation.
Yeah.
Throughout this whole discussion about diversifying your portfolio, about migrating, investment migration and residency and everything else. I think the one thing that we always have to advise or make note is that there's taxation involved.
Yeah.
And get tax advice and understand in which jurisdiction you'd benefit better.
Yeah.
We're not saying you're going to go into a country where there's no taxation at all. We're just saying go into a jurisdiction that will align to your financial needs with the understanding of taxation on both sides. Because even if you still stay in South Africa, but your investment migrates somewhere else, you're still going to be liable here.
Not necessarily. It all depends. It's a lot more nuanced than that. Yes, you're quite right. There are two certainties in life, passing away and taxes. We know that. But in many countries, in the case of South Africa, we're quite blessed. Many other countries do have double tax agreements.
Yeah.
So there's no risk of double taxation. And many programs around the world actually don't require you to break the South African residency rules to participate in them. As your listeners are quite aware, the residency rules in its simplest form is more than 184 days, 85 days out of South Africa over a period of 3 years, or where do you return from your wanderings, all those rules. But in many cases, you don't actually have to invest that amount of time abroad to benefit from such a program, and hence you won't necessarily fall foul of the residency rules. However, it is important, obviously, to be mindful of it when embarking on this journey, and do seek tax advice. But participation in one of these programs, no, it does not automatically trigger a tax event.
Okay, perfect. And just out of interest, going back to the report and also touching on the demographics and characteristics of the families and individuals that participate in these programs. I mean, can you share some common traits? I mean, investment preferences, business activities that some of these individuals are participating in. What's the common trait? What's the common code in all these individuals that probably have the 21 billionaires that constitute or that reside in Africa?
It's actually quite a difficult question to answer, because we see such a wide variety of individuals from all demographics, from all backgrounds. Obviously, the one common trait is you do have to have enough disposable capital to make the necessary investment. So it does require a certain benchmark, without saying. But how those individuals acquired that wealth
it's always diverse.
It is always diverse. Maybe the one interesting trait, thinking about it, is a global mindset.
Yeah,
that's certainly a common element with our clients, because to have that initial idea or be attracted to the idea of a investment migration program, you need to have a certain idea in mind that attracts you to it. In terms of age, we got a range from young entrepreneurs all the way up to wealthy and retired businessmen. And from all walks of life and from all parts of the continent. There is no one trait, I'm afraid to say.
I think I would have just said, if there was one trait, then we'd all be running towards it.
Yeah.
Because if it was one recipe that made success, we'd all be heading towards it.
It's true.
But because it's different individuals that see things in a different light, we all see the opportunity in different places. And therefore, we make it work where we see the opportunity to succeed.
Okay. Whilst there, Larita, so is it wise to say that there is still quite a lot of opportunity within the continent to exploit? Personally, I look at two aspects, manufacturing and building some sort of a financial ecosystem that's able to suck in capital formation. I mean, the savings of the maids, the ladies that are selling tomatoes on the side of the road. If you've got an ecosystem, if we're able to build an ecosystem that sucks in all that capital formation and literally pass it on into productive productive sectors of our economy, such as manufacturing, I think that poses quite a big opportunity for us. I mean, that's my personal take. I don't know about you guys. Yeah.
I think you've just answered yourself.
And
just in essence of, yes, manufacturing, unskilled labor and everything else, I think there's still a lot of opportunity in Africa and South Africa.
Yeah.
The more we travel, the more you see throughout the continent how much that there still needs to be shaped. But the current environment that they're operating within and still prevailing just shows, besides the resilience, also shows the entrepreneurial aspect of us as a continent. But I actually feel like you've answered yourself just by saying that we have right there at the bottom the ladies right at the corner of the robots selling or unregulated sectors that are feeding into regulated sectors, and that economy of scale can develop us very far.
And also in terms of capital markets, you need to look at the unique African success stories that have serviced that very demographic. The Kenyan example, I believe it was M-Pesa, the money transfer system that of a decade or so ago that was pioneering at its time, and would not have been replicated in any other part of the world if it was not for the challenges that were faced by those individuals where they were in Africa. as another example in South Africa, you look at the advantage we have in terms of not being tied to legacy financial systems. The likes of African Bank and Bank Zero as democratizing banking at extremely low fees. Bringing banking on a cell phone to the masses without the need for having costly branches around the country. Are certainly catalysts to encourage very positive financial behaviors like saving and the ease of transferring payments between individuals seamlessly and effectively and very quickly. That ecosystem is ostensibly building an economic backbone, an infrastructure on which the growth of Africa will be built.